Okay, so this video we're going to talk about what are the basic tools needed to port a chainsaw. Just something to get you started. What is the bare minimum that you need to get started? And then in the later part of this video, I'll go into a little bit more of an advanced setup, which is what I have. So the first thing that you need to do, or you need to have in order to port a chainsaw and get decent results, is you need to either buy or make a squish band cutting mandrel. This is assuming that you don't have your own lathe. If you have your own lathe, then you can make a mandrel to cut the base. Then you can put a 4-jaw chuck on your lathe and indicate your cylinder in, and then use a boring bar to cut the chamber. If you're not going to cut the chamber, I don't feel that, raising the ports, changing the durations is really worth your time. I mean, you can do minor things with, like a base gasket delete on some saws, but I don't think it's worth the investment here for these tools if you don't have the ability to cut the chamber. Now, one thing you can do is you can do a piston swap, like in these 52 millimeter bore size saws that have a 12 millimeter wrist pin. So that's the diameter of this pin that holds the piston onto the connecting rod, like your 372s, your 440s and 460s. That's just a couple of examples of saws that have that 52 or 50 millimeter bore that you can do a piston swap. And like for a 372, you can do a 272 piston, or you can do an 064 piston. And the 064 piston is the piston that I like to use in my 440, 460 builds, because that piston's got the widest exhaust skirt width, and it just really works well for how I'm doing it. So the first thing that you're going to need is a flex shaft grinder. I'll show you what it looks like. So this is my flex shaft grinder right here from Harbor Freight. It comes with one straight hand tool here with a little chuck, and it comes with a little chuck key that you can switch out your bits and tighten them up. There's nothing wrong with this setup. This is what I'll probably continue to use. You can invest more money in, this is 50 bucks, or you can spend 350 bucks and get the Foredom. Now, one difference between this flex shaft grinder and the Foredom is this one is said to be 1/4 horsepower, and the Foredom is like 1/6. So if those numbers are right, this one has more power, and you want more power. There ain't nothing wrong with this one, just the Foredom has the ability to have reverse, which is a little easier for doing these transfers. Let me turn on this other light. These quad port transfers. If you're only going to do cylinders with a dual port transfer, like the older Stihl cylinders to start with, I don't think that you need to have the ability to run in reverse. But we'll get more in depth on that later. So what I've done with my flex shaft grinder setup here is I've made a little plate that these sit on. You can see, move this out of the way, I just made a little swivel thing that holds them into place here out of some scrap oak boards. And I've raised the heel up here so that I'm not trying to have my foot raised super high. This kind of gets your calf muscle tired. So I've got the heel raised a little higher, so I'm pushing down versus trying to reach up to control it. That's just what I've done. The foot pedal's really light, so I think maybe at minimum you want to have some type of pad that holds it still, so you got more control. So, oh, my thing shut off here. So first thing that you need here is a flex shaft grinder. So we'll call it 45 bucks. We're going to do no taxes with this setup here. This is a basic, but this will get you started and get you into the hobby. Next thing you're going to need is a right angle handpiece. I was trying to zoom in, but it won't let me zoom in. So you need a right angle handpiece. This one comes from Alibaba. There's nothing wrong with this one. It'll definitely do the 52 millimeter bore cylinders just fine. You will need to cut down your burrs. Yeah, I thought I had a shorty up here. Yeah, the shorty. You do need to cut down your burrs down a little bit so you got more room in the cylinder, kind of like what I did with this one. So this right angle handpiece, this is for raising the transfers. You'll need one of these. We'll call it $30. And so 30 for the handpiece. Now note on these handpieces, these are coming from China. I ordered mine from Alibaba. I'm gonna probably order a couple more of these at some point because it's nice to have multiple tool heads because these are quick disconnect, and I can show you real quick that if I want to switch from this tool over to this tool here, I'll just kind of look in there, get the pin lined up, and then I'm ready to use this one. So these are quick disconnect. That's what's nice. So if you have multiple hand pieces, it'll make your porting process quicker. Kind of when you're in the zone, you'll kind of understand when you get into this, you get in the zone where you're just on a roll. So $26 for this. Now note that it's coming from China. You are going to have to wait at least, it says like 10 days. I made this yesterday. So take a minimum of 10 days to get here from China. So keep that in mind. I think I waited almost a month for mine, but that was back like right around the COVID time, so it took a little longer. So 30 for a hand piece. Then you're going to need an assortment of cutters. So I've got some long ones here, the 4-inch long. These are all 1/8 shank for this tool and this Harbor Freight tool. I'm running an 1/8 shank cutters. Now, one thing that's important with this tool here is that the collet size is slightly undersized. It's not a true 1/8 inch. So you need to order these eBay cutters. This is kind of how they look when you get them on eBay. I just get a couple assortments. I don't use these ones like this one here on the end, this pointed one. This one's nice. This one works good. I don't use this one, and I don't use this one for any of like doing any cylinder work. They do work good just to have, you know, a fresh set of cutters for, you know, hogging out mufflers. You know, the stainless mufflers are hard on these cutters, so I just use those ones that I'll never use actually in the cylinder for those purposes, but I like having a good assortment. I have some smaller ones here, which I'll open up. See how you open it up and show you. Have some smaller ones here to get the corners perfectly square, if that's what you're trying to do. So you must use for this tool here, this Alibaba tool, you must use the Chinese eBay cutters. All you gotta do is just search on eBay 1/8 inch carbide burrs. I am running the double cut, so it looks like this. These are nice for, especially for your cylinders that have plating that chips easier. The plating will not chip as bad with this style of cutter, or if you got really hard plating. I don't like using my Alumahog style cutters on the plating that's really hard, because it'll just wear them out. And then these are pretty expensive. These are like $20 a piece. So I'll just kind of rough the port height in with this one and then hog out the back wall, so I have a nice flat transition, you know, for the flow to come across the cylinder. That's kind of how I'm doing it. So I think it's good to have an assortment of both, but for a bare bones setup here, just go with the double cuts. That'll get you started. So we got 15 for this set. We'll just call them each 20. 20 for one. I got two, just another different assortment, and another one. 20, 40, 60. So we'll do 60. And this is for 60 for burrs off of eBay. The next thing that you're going to need, now this is not needed, but it really makes a big difference. I assume that most people have a hand drill, just a little battery powered drill. The RPM on this I think is like 2000 or 1800 in the high mode. So what I use is I use these cartridge rolls here. They're calling them on eBay sanding cone set. It comes in 80, 100, and 120. This is another thing you can get at Harbor Freight. I haven't looked on the internet if you can get them cheaper anywhere else, but one of these packs will do, I don't know, 5 saws or something like that, maybe a little less. But what you do is you chuck this up in your drill, And then what it does is it allows you to make your transition of your exhaust port nice and smooth. Since this is pretty flat, it'll smooth out your exhaust port once you get your height set. I mean, you're going to have to run your burr in there to kind of remove the majority of the material, but to get it flat, I like using these. And then I'll go, like it says here, 80, 100, 120. And then I'll switch over to a split mandrel to, bring the finish up to where I want it to be. So 20 for the sanding cones. Next thing you're going to need if you're doing this, you need a degree wheel. So I got mine on eBay. It's this Motion Pro one. $20 for a degree wheel, and then you need a way to connect your degree wheel to your chainsaw crankshaft here, so you can get the right port heights that you want. I'm just using a ring, one of the piston rings, and the piston, and then I just use a fine point Sharpie like this to color in exactly where I want to raise the port to. And what I do is I grind to the bottom of the Sharpie line so I can still see it. Technically, to get the height that you want, you need to grind to the top of the Sharpie line, but then I'm going to bevel it with a stone. So I grind to the bottom of the Sharpie line, and I run that stone on there to bevel that edge, and then it's pretty much right on. The next thing you're going to need is a way to connect your degree wheel to your crankshaft, like I said. So I use a drill chuck, and my degree wheel here has this bolt that matches the thread pitch of that drill chuck. So I screw my drill chuck onto my crankshaft once I pull the clutch drum off in the sprocket here. It's a nice flat surface, so you can screw that on. Then I use my second nut here and my wire on the second nut to get the position for the degree wheel and get it zeroed. And then I screw this guy on here and tighten it up so that it doesn't move when I have the right, have it set up. So we'll just do 25 for chuck. I like this method. I've seen other people do it a different way, but I like having a nut here. And if you buy the same drill chuck that I had, it actually is the same size as your bar nuts here. So that was a nice thing. I didn't know that. I cut a little slot in it to run a flathead screwdriver in it, but it actually is the right size to run your steel tool, or your chain, your scrunch. Okay, so this is your bare bones setup. I'm sure there's other little things, but this is like the majority of what you need to know to get started here. So we'll calculate the total. So 45 plus 30 plus 60 plus 20 plus 20 plus 25. So you're going to need a minimum of $200 to get started here. That's assuming that you are going to buy one of these mandrels. I think one guy that ports a lot of saws on YouTube, he makes these and makes little sleeves for them out of like some type of plastic that slide on, so that you can cut the chamber to do your piston swap if that's how you're going to do it. There's nothing wrong with doing the piston swap. I actually feel that I get better results on like my 440, 460s with doing the piston swap. So we'll call it $200 is your bare minimum setup just to get all the tools you'll need. So that's your bare bones setup. Now let's get into your little bit more advanced setup here, and we'll kind of go into the differences and the pros and cons. It's really all pros. The more tools you got, the faster you can do one of these, kind of like what I said earlier. So this handpiece is from CC Specialty. The price of this one is $478, so we're just going to call it $500 for hand. And we'll call this advanced. I mean, in my advanced setup, I mean, you can take it as far as you want. How much money do you really want to invest in your setup here? Is, how many saws are you doing, all that. And the one thing I will say that I forgot to mention earlier is that doing this, for me, it takes me about one full day to do one of these saws. So that's at least an 8-hour day to cut the chamber, make sure it's perfectly flat, do the muffler mod, do all the port work. I mean, it takes a long time, and that's like a full 8-hour day for me. I mean, other people might be able to do it faster, but is their quality that good? I don't know. I mean, I would assume that the more you do it, the faster you get at it. That's what I've seen. But I question how people can do them in, 3-4 hours, I guess. That's kind of, because I know I cannot do that, and I've done 10 to 15 saws myself so far, so... but I'm a slower worker, and I like to do these things to the best of my ability. And I'm also doing, crankcase mods and other stuff to try to get a little bit more out of it. But keep that in mind, that this is not just something that you just, it's not going to really take much time at all or anything like that. It does take a good amount of time to do this. So $500 for this handpiece. We'll go over kind of some of the benefits of this one versus the Alibaba one, because this one's a lot more money. But you can see the head is a lot smaller on this tool here, and the length of the shaft here is longer. So this little bit of extra length allows you to get a full hand purchase on your tool when you're raising the transfers, which is needed, especially on the side where it likes to jump. So one of the sides in here, your tool, the rotation of the tool is going to pull the cutter down into the corner, so it'll be nice and easy to raise. But the other side, it's going to want to jump and pull up the cylinder, and potentially jump out if you're not holding it secure enough. So on these quad ports, like I said before, it would be nice to have the reverse control, but then if you're going to get that reverse control, you need to have cutters that are left-hand cutters that cut the other way. So having this smaller head will allow you to see better into the cylinder, because I have this little piece of Scotch-Brite on here, but I mean it's a lot bigger in there, and you can't see as good, and you can't quite hit the angles if you're trying to angle the ports more to the intake side. This one's a lot harder because you can't really get as much of an angle. You can kind of see on these quad port cylinders where having this pan piece would be a lot more beneficial versus, let me get a dual port cylinder here. We'll use the small one just to show you. And you can see that this one will do a lot better job. You can match that same port with this one, if I put a shorter cutter on it. But this one here, you've got this collet here that's protrudes out, so that also kind of works against you to try to raise the port and get it angled exactly where you want to angle it. It makes a difference. That's why I spent the $500 and got this tool here. I wrapped this one with some tennis racket handle tape here just to get a little bit better grip. That worked pretty good. And this one I just wrapped with electrical tape because the little foam stuff on here was kind of cheap and flimsy. But there ain't nothing wrong with this tool, especially if you're doing the bigger cylinders. I'd say minimum size cylinder that I do is a 50mm with this one. It's going to be a little tight if you go any smaller than that, but it can be done. So I'm going to just kind of put a picture of the dimensions here, showing that it's smaller. The next thing that you're going to need for your advanced setup is some more of these single cut cutters. These remove material faster and they give you a better surface finish, is what I feel like these do, if you hold it with good pressure. If you let it bounce around in there, it's going to give you a worse surface finish than these single or these double cut cutters. But these here, if you hold the pressure on it, like especially if you're doing the transfers and you're putting the pressure on it, it'll cut really smooth, and you really don't need to smooth them up at the end. And they also remove material faster. So I just got an assortment of these CC Specialty. That's where you get these cutters. Now, one thing with this tool is you got to run the CC Specialty cutters. You can't use the cheap eBay cutters, because like I said before, the diameter here on the Chinese ones is slightly smaller than an 1/8 inch, and this design here is really only set up to use that perfectly 1/8 inch shank size cutters. So I only run the CC Specialty cutters with this tool here, and you only can use the Chinese ones with this one here, okay? So we'll just call them all $20. They're $18.50 a piece. I've got a couple different shapes here. So I've got this one, which appears to be the hog shape R, 1/8 inch shank. So they call these a hog, or a Luma hog is what these are. And for my cutters, I really like these ones with a rounded tip here. Like I said before, I do not really care much for these ones with this flat head here. I'll open it up to show you so you can see. I don't like this square corner style cutter for doing any of the work inside the cylinder. I'd much prefer one of these rounded head ones because it just doesn't grab as easy, and this kind of will screw up your surface finish. So I use these ones like this. Oops. This one here with these points, and these square head ones just for doing like muffler mods and, you know, enlarging the exhaust port to match the cylinder. If you've widened out your cylinder here to the bolts. So we'll kind of total up the cutter, just kind of your minimum needed. The more you got, the better. They do wear out. Both the single cut and the double cuts do wear out. Now, these eBay ones there's nothing wrong with these as far as how they cut. They last just, I mean, to me, they last just as long as these CC Specialty ones from what I've seen. But, you know, you pick what you want here. So we got 20, 40, 60 for the cutters. I'll get you 3 cutters. Okay, and then I got a couple of diamond stones here. You got to experiment yourself with what you feel works the best, that gives you the best result. So you can use a diamond stone to bevel all the ports that you've modified, or if you're working on a Chinese cylinder where they don't really got good quality control, or you need to go in there and chamfer all the edges of all the ports, I'd recommend doing that on those. And on any of the cylinders that you're altering the port heights and stuff, you should put some type of, I don't know, 30-degree or so bevel on them at least. So you can use one of these diamond stones. So we'll do 40 for the diamond. 40 for the diamond stones. And it looks like I added just one other double cut cutter. And like I said before, you know, if you've got a cylinder that chips easy, like the Husqvarna, they use, I think, some type of Nikasil in those cylinders where the still uses chrome. And, you know, the Chinese ones, you just really got to look at the listing or whatever, in the, you know, where it's for sale, what kind of plating is in it. I prefer the chrome personally, but the Husqvarna Nikasil still ports good. You just got to be a little more careful, and I like to use the double cuts for the Husqvarna ones. So we'll do another, we'll call this 80 for one double cut in there. Now another thing I like to use is a stone. Now this is just one of these cheap stones from Lowe's or Home Depot. That's where I got this one that's meant for a Dremel. I like to use this to put that initial chamfer on the ports after I raise them to the height that I want. Personally, I get better results from the stone. And then what I do is I have this chucked up in my tool that I'm using, and then I use my little diamond wheel here and I profile the edge to get that angle that I want. I'm just kind of doing it by hand. That seems to work just fine. But CC Specialty has stones here, and they do wear out fairly quick, so you're not going to get that many cylinders out of a stone. So that's why I like the ones just from Lowe's or wherever, work just fine. Now each colored stone has a different grit, and I personally like the ones that are orange or pink. Those are the ones that I like the best, but you got to experiment yourself. So we'll do 20 for a stone. And then another thing, now this is my next step that I do, and I do this on all my saws, is I'll run one of these rubberized mandrels here with their little tool. It kind of sits on there like this. This one's pretty worn out. But after I run the stone to chamfer it, I'll run this one here, this rubberized sanding compound in there to get them perfect, so that when you rub your finger across them, that your finger doesn't catch. And I feel that doing that, you know, will prevent any type of ring catching or plating, chipping, anything like that. So I just take that extra step. It doesn't take that much longer to do. So we'll call it, these are like $1.30 a piece, so we'll just say 20 bucks for the rubberized abrasives to get you a good assortment. I like the green ones. The green ones work perfectly fine. I just ordered an assortment when I initially bought these to experiment with, but the green will get you the surface finish that you want if you're going to do this. Next thing you need is a split mandrel. This just, if you're trying to get that perfectly polished exhaust port from the 80 to 120, or 80 to 100, 120 is what the eBay, or no, the Harbor Freight sanding mandrel kit comes with. You need a step in between that and the Scotch-Brite here for your polish. You know, the Scotch-Brite works really well for polishing the cylinders and getting this kind of mirror finish that's, you know, perfectly smooth. I feel that that little step there is a why not. Why not make it, you know, as smooth as you can? But I'm not going to go in there with a polishing compound and polish it, because this gives good results here with a little WD-40. But I do feel that it's kind of like a why not when you're doing your cylinder. It just prevents the carbon buildup, like you can see here on just your factory cylinder. This cylinder was ran a good bit, and you can see there's no buildup in there on the exhaust port, versus this is just a factory exhaust port here. So that's what I do. The split mandrel will get you from that 120 surface finish up to somewhere close, so that when you get to this one, you're just polishing it. You're basically, what you're doing is you're bringing the high spots down to the low spots, and then you get a nice flat surface finish that's nice and smooth to the touch. So I run the split mandrel, which that is, we'll just call it 20 bucks. It's $14 on Amazon. Now, the other thing is if you're going to use the drill for that, I feel that it works perfectly fine with these here to run the drill. But if you're going to do the split mandrel setup, I think that a little higher speed would give you better results. So I've got a new Foredom 1/4 inch collet straight handpiece here to run the 1/4 inch collet that can use that 1/4 inch split mandrel. So that guy there, we'll call him 90. That's also got on Amazon too. And the main reason, because I get decent results just using a drill with this setup here, I've done that for a while. The main reason that I got this one is to run these larger burrs, and I'll show you these 1/4 inch burrs that look like this. I just tested it out on my 880 cylinder with this one. This is a crude method here to do it and have it chucked up in a vise. But this removes material a lot quicker than this guy, because it's got a lot more cutters per revolution. So it's going to remove material a lot quicker. So that should speed up your time of shaping the exhaust port if you're removing a lot of material, like on a 500i, or, you know, some of these other saws. That's just an example of one that's got a really small exhaust port from the factory. So that's just a good time saver. If you're going to be doing several saws, it's kind of a why not. And this handpiece here will work with the Harbor Freight. It's got the same collet, or you know, same connection down there. So that's what I'm using there. And then I just added in a couple of these cutters here that are 1/4 inch shanks. So these are a little bit more expensive. They're $30 a piece, so 30, 60, 90 for some of these 1/4 inch burrs. Okay, and then the last thing I'd say that, now this is, you know, your, you know, super advanced setup, is one of these Foredom flex shaft grinders that has the reverse option. Now, like I said before, the only reason that I would get one of these is really just for doing these quad port cylinders, so that I get both sides to perfectly match each other. I feel that it's a little bit more difficult to do it with your handpiece that only runs one way, because one side's going to want to jump and the other one's going to be perfect. So this is not really needed, but this is something that some people use that is a nice another piece to have in your arsenal of your chainsaw porting tools. So we'll do, that's the, oops, that's your Foredom grinder there. So your total of your advanced setup, this is going to be a good bit more expensive, as you can see. So 500 plus 80 plus 40 plus 20 plus 20 plus 20 plus 90 plus 90 plus 3, oops, 50. So this total, kind of what we went through here, is 1210. And you know, obviously you can get more cutters, more burrs. I'm kind of calling multiple different names here, but I just call them cutters most of the time. But $1,200 is, you know, $1,200 plus this other setup. I mean, if you're going to have this setup, then you're probably going to advance to this setup here, and I feel that having both is really beneficial. Specifically for having the ability to have multiple hand pieces where you're not changing out the burrs. So, like for example, what I use this one for mostly now is I'll run my stones that have the smaller collet in here, just the ones that I buy that are that little bit smaller shank size that fit in this one. I'll run on here to chamfer the ports. But the main use that I use this one for is for running the Scotch-Brite. So the Scotch-Brite doesn't really stay in place in the split mandrel. So what I do is I buy a set of these cotter pins from Harbor Freight. I don't remember what size it is. Just go there and get the assortment. And one of them will fit perfectly in the collet here, and you can tighten it down and it doesn't move. But what I do is I crush this end here in the vise, and then I open it up, and then I put my piece of Scotch-Brite in here and then shove it in the collet here and tighten it down, and this keeps it from falling out. And this is what I use to polish the exhaust ports, this setup here. So in the future for me, I'm going to order probably 3 more of these, maybe 3 or 4 more of these, so I can have multiple different tools on hand here, just to speed up the process, because it does kind of slow you down when you got to switch the cutter out, you got to put a stone in. Maybe I didn't quite get this how I want it to look, so I'm going to go back in and reshape it a little bit. It just really cuts down on the time to have multiple tools here for doing this. So that's kind of just your, I mean, this is really like a intermediate advanced setup is what I've got, is what I would call it. But this is just a video meant to be just kind of an introductory to what it's going to take to do one of these chainsaws and get a good running chainsaw out of it. I would recommend, if you're going to do this, I would start by using numbers that someone else has been nice enough to share with everyone on the internet as what works for them, and then from there I would start experimenting on your own. It seems for me, with my porting style, it seems that I get better results with more blowdown. So that's kind of the theme that I'm going to use on my 461 here, 400C over there, and my 661. I'm just going to do a little bit more blowdown than what some of these other builders are doing to hopefully kind of match the results that I got out of this initial Farmertech 440. So I've kind of shared what's been done to this one before. So I bought a used OEM 460 cylinder on eBay. It was the D chamber, so that's why I call it 046 cylinder. And I put an 064 piston in it. I did not cut the base. I just made a mandrel to cut the chamber. And the squish, I think the squish is like 30 thousandths or something like that. I overshot on the squish because I didn't cut it flat, because the D chamber cylinders are harder to cut flat. So you really need a sanding mandrel here to ensure that your squish band cutting mandrel is cutting flat, because the farther it gets out of round or out of flat, however you want to say it, the harder it's going to be to get it back to flat. So what I'll do is I'll either run a gasket underneath to see where it rotates over fully, because that's what you're doing when you're cutting a cylinder. I'll run 2 little set screws like what's in here right now. I just cut a little slot with a hacksaw in here to screw them in with a screwdriver, a little fine flathead screwdriver. So I can slide the cylinder on, see if I've cut enough material out of the chamber to get the motor to rotate over with the gasket, or I'll do 2 gaskets if I'm going to use a gasket, so I have that extra 20 thousandths of room where I can sand it back to flat and then do my final cuts with my mandrel, because the sanding does not, you know, give a smooth surface finish, as you can see, and I'm trying to have a nice smooth finish so that there's no carbon buildup. That's just what I personally like to go for on the top of the piston and the combustion chamber itself. So yeah, I think I've covered pretty much all I can think of for this one. Thanks for watching.